To meet the requirements of a letter of credit, the buyer now has the authority to direct their carrier to issue an on-board bill of lading to the seller. In this video, we will also cover the following topics. 1. What is free carrier FCA, and what are the buyer and seller responsibilities and risks? 2. What is the relationship between FCA and routed export transactions? 3. What are the drawbacks for sellers when opting for FCA? And more. Welcome back to Shipping Revisit. Today, the spotlight is on free carrier or FCA. Understanding FCA is essential, whether you're a seasoned exporter or just getting started. So, let's get started.
What is free carrier?
Under the Incoterms 2020 regulations, FCA free carrier denotes that the seller must either load the goods onto the buyer's chosen transport at the seller's premises or deliver them to another designated location. Typically, it is common for the buyer to arrange for a transport service to collect the goods from the seller's warehouse. At this juncture, the risk associated with the goods shifts from the seller to the buyer. Alternatively, the seller and buyer can mutually decide that the seller will transport the goods to a location different from the seller's warehouse, such as a freight forwarder's facility or the carrier's terminal. In this scenario, the risk and liability associated with the goods transition from the seller to the buyer once the goods become available at the designated location. In this case, the buyer is responsible for unloading the goods from the seller's transport. In both situations, the seller must ensure that the goods are appropriately packaged in accordance with the terms specified in the agreement between both parties. Additionally, the seller bears the responsibility for handling export clearance procedures.
How do the new regulations help the seller meet the requirements of a letter of credit?
The most notable alteration in the Incoterms 2020 regulations is the free carrier FCA term. Under FCA, the buyer now has the authority to direct their carrier to issue a bill of lading, complete with an on-board notation, to the seller. This provision enables the seller to meet the requirements of a letter of credit. In an F-group rule scenario, the at a named place aspect falls within the seller's purview, while the buyer assumes responsibility for engaging the primary carrier and freight forwarder. Notably, the seller lacks control over shipments when operating under the F term, meaning the freight forwarder and carrier hold no obligation towards the seller. Historically, this setup has posed challenges when conducting transactions under a letter of credit, as international carriers had no incentive to furnish the bill of lading to the seller, who typically needed it to receive payment as stipulated in the letter of credit. The FCA Incoterms 2020 rule presents a potential remedy. The buyer and seller can mutually agree in the sales contract that the buyer must instruct the carrier to provide the seller with an on-board transportation document. However, it's crucial to note that although the buyer can issue instructions to the carrier to provide the necessary bill of lading to the seller, there is no absolute guarantee of compliance. Even if the carrier does comply, they will only issue the document after the goods have been loaded, potentially leading to delays in the seller receiving payment under the letter of credit.
What are the transportation options for free carrier?
The International Chamber of Commerce (ICC) has categorized the 11 Incoterms into two groups: those suitable for use in any mode of transportation and those specifically designed for transport by sea and inland waterways. This distinction arises from a recurring issue where companies selected Incoterms that dictated the transfer of risk and responsibilities at an impractical point for journeys not involving ocean transport. Under Incoterms 2020, the free carrier FCA term can be applied across various modes of transportation, including air, courier, truck, rail, vessel, or multimodal shipments.
What are the drawbacks for sellers when opting for FCA?
As previously mentioned, free carrier FCA is generally regarded as the preferred Incoterm within the F group. However, experts in the field often point out specific drawbacks for sellers when opting for FCA. 1. Challenges may arise when utilizing a letter of credit under FCA, as discussed earlier. 2. Sellers might not have prior familiarity with the chosen freight forwarder. 3. There is a potential for goods diversion within the United States before they depart or to another country after leaving the U.S., potentially violating the Export Administration Regulations here. Notably, some U.S. companies that conduct business with Mexico opt for FCA. In this scenario, they deliver the goods to the U.S. side of a border crossing, after which the responsibility for transportation across the border into Mexico falls upon the buyer.
Does FCA include insurance?
It's important to note that insurance is not inherently included in the free carrier FCA Incoterm. The two Incoterms that explicitly necessitate insurance coverage are CIF cost, insurance, and freight, and CIP carriage and insurance paid to. Under FCA, the buyer typically assumes the responsibility for securing insurance coverage for the goods, ensuring they are protected during transit from the seller's premises to their final destination.
What sets FCA apart from Ex-Works?
In an Ex-Works EXW arrangement, the buyer bears the onus of retrieving the goods from the seller's premises, handling the loading onto their chosen mode of transport, and managing all tasks required to transport the goods to their destination. Conversely, under the free carrier FCA Incoterm, the seller assumes additional responsibilities, primarily loading the goods onto the buyer's chosen means of transportation. Under EXW, the buyer must undertake all export and import customs procedures. In contrast, FCA places the onus on the seller to handle export clearance. There you have it, a comprehensive look at FCA free carrier Incoterms. Choosing the right Incoterm is crucial in international trade to avoid misunderstandings and unexpected costs. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and remember to subscribe for more educational and entertaining content on Shipping Revisit. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.